You know, when you take part in a medical study or even just take a prescription drug, there's this whole system of rules there to protect you. But those rules didn't just appear out of nowhere. They were literally forged in the fire of some of the darkest moments in modern history.
It's a question we all kind of ask, even if we don't say it out loud. How can we be sure that the science that's supposed to help us isn't actually harming us or someone else along the way?
Well, the thing is, the answer is kind of dark. It's written in the language of tragedy. Because the story of modern medical ethics is really a story about learning lessons the absolute hardest way possible. It's about how we as a society responded to horrible failures by building the safeguards we all count on today. Okay, so let's get into it. Our story really kicks off right after World War II. There was a series of trials that didn't just shock the world, they created the very first global demand for some kind of ethical standards in human research.
So after the war ended, the world was forced to look at the full horror of the Nazi regime. And that included these grotesque, deadly experiments that were done on prisoners in concentration camps without any consent whatsoever. The trials were about holding these doctors accountable for those atrocities.
So here's the crucial thing. What came out of the court's verdict wasn't just a judgment. No, it was this foundational statement on the ethics of medical research, the first of its kind, and one that would echo for decades. And this just lays it all out. The Nuremberg Code gives us 10 crystal clear principles. At the very heart of it, number one is that voluntary consent is absolutely essential. But look at the rest. It builds on that, saying experiments have to be for the good of society. They have to avoid unnecessary pain. And this is huge. Participants can walk away at any time. This was absolutely revolutionary. A direct response to horror, creating a moral baseline for all the research that would come after. But here's the catch. As powerful as the Nuremberg Code was, it wasn't actually legally binding. And in the years that followed, it became tragically clear that just having a moral code, well, it wasn't going to be enough to stop the next catastrophe. So, picture this. It's the late 1950s, and there's this new drug called thalidomide. It becomes super popular across Europe, and doctors often gave it to pregnant women for morning sickness. It was seen as totally safe, a real wonder drug. But it wasn't. It had devastating, unforeseen effects. An estimated 12,000 babies were born with severe limb deformities, all because of this one drug. A whole generation was scarred because nobody had properly tested it for safety.
The global outcry was massive, and it led to real action. Right here in the US, Congress passed the Kefauver-Harris amendments. This was a game changer. It basically gave the FDA way more power, and for the first time required companies to prove a drug was not only safe, but that it actually worked before it could ever get to you.
Now, believe it or not, while all of this was happening on the world stage, something much longer and in some ways much more sinister was unfolding in the rural South. All the way back in 1932, the U.S. Public Health Service started a study to see what happens when syphilis just goes untreated. And this is where it's just horrifying. The level of deception here is staggering. The study recruited 600 African American men. They told them they were getting free medical care for something they called bad blood. But the reality? It was a monstrous betrayal. For 40 years, the researchers just watched the disease destroy their bodies. And get this, even after penicillin became the standard cure in the 1950s, they actively kept it from these men for 2 more decades.
So, in 1972, the Associated Press finally broke the story, and the public was just horrified. The Tuskegee study became this national symbol of everything that could go wrong, of deep racism and a complete collapse of ethics. It created this profound wound of mistrust in the medical system, especially in the African American community, a wound that for many has never really healed. It forced a massive reckoning here in the States. The outrage over Tuskegee was so intense that it led directly to the creation of a totally new, comprehensive, ethical framework for all research in the U.S., and this would become known as the Belmont Report.
So how did it happen? Well, first, Congress stepped in. The National Research Act of 1974 wasn't just some recommendation. This was the law. It created a national commission, and their one job was to figure out the basic ethical principles that should guide every single study involving human beings.
And what they came up with was brilliant in its simplicity. Instead of a huge list of complicated rules, they boiled it all down to 3 core principles. First, respect for persons.
That means you treat people as individuals who can make their own decisions, and informed consent is a fundamental right. Second, beneficence. You know, the classic do no harm, but also you have to try to do good. And third, justice. This means making sure that the risks of research aren't unfairly placed on one group, especially vulnerable people. So, we've walked this really tough road, right? From Nuremberg to Tuskegee, a path of tragedy and reform. But what does all this difficult history actually mean for the science and medicine that we all experience today? I mean, look at this timeline. It lays it all out, plain and simple. You can literally draw a straight line from each one of these failures to a concrete reform. The horrors at Nuremberg led to the code. The thalidomide disaster led to a stronger FDA. And the deep betrayal of Tuskegee led directly to the National Research Act and, finally, the Belmont Report. Progress was literally born from pain.
And that right there, that's what you really need to get from all this. These aren't just dusty old documents sitting in a museum. The principles from the Belmont Report are alive right now. They are the federal regulations that govern every single clinical trial in the United States. This is the very bedrock of our trust in science. And maybe that's the ultimate lesson. See, strong ethics and good science aren't fighting each other. They're inextricably linked. The only way we can get true, lasting medical progress is if we are totally committed to protecting the dignity and safety of every single person who participates in research. And that brings us to right now, and one last question to think about. We're in this age of unbelievable innovation. AI, genetic engineering, it's all moving so fast. The ethical challenges are only going to get more complex. So the real test for us is, can we keep innovating while always remembering the history that taught us the incredibly high price of progress?